Well, what a beautiful May weekend, and I'm so pleased that we get to jump into this next installment of this series from the book of Proverbs in the Bible called The Way of the Wise. And so let me just ask you a question. When was the last time somebody offered advice to you? Advice that you weren't necessarily asking for, and really didn't want to hear. When is the last time someone offered you unsolicited advice? Now, it was quite some time ago. My ministry assistant at the time was Marcia, and Marcia was holding an email that she had printed out. And this email came from a pastor in Ohio that had listened to one of my sermons and then wrote a detailed email letting me know different areas of my preaching that I could improve. Now, understand something. This is someone I had never met. We had talked on the phone once, and they were critiquing my preaching. Now, understand something. I don't have a lot of skills. I mean, I know guys that can rip a car engine apart and actually get it back together. There are dudes that can roast an entire pig in their backyard, and it's mouth-wateringly delicious. There are people that can somehow renovate an entire basement in a weekend. I know people with useful skills who can read a spreadsheet or accurately read a tape measure. Me, I don't have a ton of skills, but there is something that I have worked on for years, and it's communicating the scriptures. I teach clinics on effective communication, and here is an email from Ohio with someone offering my advice about my preaching, someone from a smaller church, someone who had not been in ministry for as long as I had, someone from Ohio. And Marcia asked, "What do you want me to do with this?" The insinuation was, do you want to read it, or do you want me to toss it? Now, I just want to suggest to you that moment when you get advice that you weren't necessarily looking for, what to do with that is one of the most critical moments in your life. And it's why the book of Proverbs pleads with us again and again to listen to what I'm just going to call listen to advice, just to listen to advice. Now, the word advice isn't always used. Sometimes it's listen to instruction, listen to correction, but there is this plea to weigh, to receive, to respond. And it's like this can go in one of two different directions. I can receive it and I can absorb it and I can weigh it, I can listen to it and learn a wiser path. Or I can just blow it off and ignore it and go, yeah, whatever, and be condemned to making the same mistakes again and again and again. And this is an important conversation for us because I believe that there is a letter from Ohio in your future. I mean, it's probably not going to come from a pastor in Ohio, but it might be a friend who calls into question a dating relationship. It might be someone in your small group who says, hey, can I talk to you a little bit about what you post on social media and the image of yourself that you're projecting? It might be from your mom or dad who says, and you just go, oh, please. What are you going to do when the letter from Ohio comes your way? It might be from a spouse who points out a thing or two that you might want to improve, or a courageous coworker that lets you know how you could bring a better version of yourself to your work or your team. I'm telling you, a letter from Ohio is in your future, and one of the most critical components in learning the way of the wise is learning how to respond when people give advice, particularly when it's advice that we weren't looking for and that we weren't asking for. Now, what I did was I just raked through the Proverbs again and again. I started to isolate different Proverbs on the importance of receiving advice, listening to correction, responding to instruction. And I've kind of isolated the material into three different parts or three different categories. And so part one, I'm just calling the challenge. Part one, I'm just calling the challenge because in Proverbs, it's like there's this repeated challenge on the importance of listening when someone gives advice. Check this one out with me. This is Proverbs chapter 19, verse 20. It just says, first three words. What are they? First three words. Listen to advice. Listen to advice and accept discipline. And in the end, you will be counted among the wise. But there it is. Listen to advice. Apparently, when advice comes our way, there's this decision as to whether to listen to it or ignore it, to grow in wisdom or to be condemned to make the same mistakes again and again. So the challenge that gets thrown out in Proverbs over and over is listen to advice. Check out this other proverb, which is very similar. It says, the way of fools, listen, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise, last three words, but the wise listen to advice. Now, let's just agree on something here. Not all advice is good advice. Just because somebody's offering advice doesn't mean it's great advice, but this word listen, it means listen, at least evaluate it, at least weigh it, at least soak it in to discern whether or not this advice is wise, sound, good. In fact, I just want to suggest today that 5 of the most powerful words in your vocabulary are the words, tell me what you see. When someone tries to give you advice that you may not even want to receive, 5 powerful words, tell me what you see. So when a friend pulls another friend aside and says, listen, this relationship you're in, listen, this is bad news. In fact, all of the people in your friend group, no one's telling you this, but we see this as unhealthy and probably leading to a disaster. Get out of this relationship as fast as you possibly can. Now, just understand something. This friend is clearly meddling. And your first impulse might be self-defensive or anger and just go, hey, I've got an idea. How about you live your life and I live mine? That's what you might be thinking. 5 of the most powerful words in your vocabulary, tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. There is a possibility that everybody around you sees something unhealthy, and this is the one courageous friend willing to risk the relationship to tell you what he sees, to tell you what she sees. Powerful words. Tell me what you see. 2 sets of parents are in conversation. One of them, they've got teenage son or daughter, and they're kind of venting a little bit. They say, this is the 3rd time this has happened over the last couple years. He wants to buy something. He doesn't have the money. He says, loan me the money. I'll pay you back. And then we loan him the money, and then we wait, and then we wait, and then we turn into a collection agency. And we have to hound him to, pay us back. And all of a sudden, the other friend says, yeah, stop doing that. Stop doing what? Stop hounding him? No. Stop loaning him money. Stop loaning her money. 5 powerful words. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. It's possible that they could say, I'll tell you what we see. We see an entire credit card culture with grown adults spending money today without any idea where that's going to come in the future. There's a possibility that in the pattern you're stepping into with your child, that you're actually unintentionally indoctrinating them for the credit card culture that awaits them. Just spend it now, worry about paying it back later. And then the friend takes one more step forward and says, really? Do you want the very first time in their life that they have actually saved up for something and then purchased it? Do you want that to be when they're out of your home? 5 powerful words. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. Friend says to another one, hey, I stopped following you on Twitter. First defensive impulse, yeah, whatever. By the way, whatever is one of the most damaging words in your vocabulary. Whatever, no. Tell me what you see. Listen, just venting angrily about a political situation. You know what people need today to offer a political opinion? They need 2 things. They need an opinion and they need a social media account. And it's not encouraging and it's not uplifting and it's not edifying. And I just grow weary. It's just adding to the noise. I know you and you have a good heart. What I read in your tweets is not reflective of the whole you, or even the best side of you. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. These are wise words. Just understand that this is not always corrective in nature. A math teacher holds a student after. Says that you do have the best grades in the class. And furthermore, you are the only student I've had in the last 5 years that has asked for extra homework. You're good at this. I don't know what you're thinking about math in the future, but I'd stick with it. And maybe when it comes time to career choice, you might want to pick something that has something to do with numbers. Now, I don't think you should make a lifetime career decision based upon one comment by a teacher, but listen to advice. Listen to advice. The words, tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. I see aptitude here, and I see speed here, and you get it before everyone else does. See, sometimes advice corrects something. Sometimes it just verifies and affirms something. But the question is still good. Tell me what you see. Sometimes it's affirming. And sometimes it's not. 2 women, they work together in an office. And one woman notices that the other one, my goodness, she's paying far more attention to her makeup than she's ever paid to her makeup before. She's dressing sharper, not only newer clothes, but better fitting clothes. I mean, if there were a before and after picture, she's just taken much better care of herself. And one day, the woman who's observing this, she says, hey, how are you and John doing? And the woman's crestfallen for a moment, says, oh, it's the same. It's just this marriage. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And the light comes on. And the woman who's observing looks at her friend and says, as she scans the office cubicle, she says, who are you dressing up for? And there's silence. She says, you give me 3 guesses. I bet you I can nail it on the first one. Who are you dressing up for? It's not your husband. Oh, it's nothing. Listen, it's always nothing until it's something. The courage to stand there in a moment, it's awkward, and say, tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. My friends, do you realize how often in Proverbs there are warnings about people who are married and kind of still dating? And you see it again and again and again. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. I've got some homework for you this week. My homework for you this week is this. At least one time, even if someone isn't giving advice in the best way, even if it's a why do you always, practice those words. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. That's your homework assignment this week. At least once, lean in instead of closing the door and say, tell me what you see. Now, I know right now that some of you are experiencing this conversation is fairly intense. For just a couple moments, I need to make it a bit more intense. And all I want to do here is expose you to the intensity and to the urgency that comes through in the verses of the Proverbs. And so I just want to move here from the challenge. Okay, listen to advice, listen to advice. It's not just a challenge, my friends. It is a plea, an urgent plea. So part two of our conversation, I just want to turn to the plea. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, Aaron Buer, Pastor Aaron, he showed you this a couple weeks back, but it's kind of the outline of Proverbs. You know, those two-line proverbs like, better is a serving of vegetables where there is love than a fatted calf with hatred. Those two-line proverbs, they occur here in the Proverbs of Solomon, like chapters 10 through 22. And again here, Proverbs 25 to 29, more Proverbs of Solomon. But when you open your Bible to the beginning of the book of Proverbs, rather than having those wise one-sentence sayings, what you have are lessons on wisdom, 9 chapters. It's like these little mini sermons on the importance of wisdom. I want you to see something there. And then down here, way at the end, it's the sayings of some guy named Lemuel. He's called King Lemuel. And so I want to look at something at the beginning. I want to look at something at the end. And I just want you to see the plea to listen, the urgency, the intensity that is behind this. My son, you've got to listen to me here. So let me do this. Let me just show you where some of these are. And if you've read through the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, and if you've read chapter 31, you've probably already witnessed these, but let me just kind of pick them out so you see them boom, boom, boom. Chapter 1, verse 8 of Proverbs. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. My son, you got to listen to me. Listen to your mom. Listen to your dad. And then again in chapter 4, listen, my sons, to your father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. And then again in verse 7, now then, my sons plural, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do you see a cadence and a repetition here? Listen, my son, to your mom and dad. Listen, my son. Listen, my sons. Now, if these were written and collected by wise King Solomon of Israel, his sons were being groomed to lead the country. His sons were being groomed for various governmental posts in agriculture, in trade, in mining, in justice. He's pleading with his sons as they're about to step into major responsibility. And this is what you find too when you drop down to the very end of the book with this King Lemuel guy who said, like, this is the advice I got from my mom. The first words of chapter 31 of Proverbs are the advice of King Lemuel's mother to this man, I think, as he's stepping toward the throne, as he's taking massive responsibility. Chapter 31, verse 2, listen, my son. Listen, son of my womb. Listen, son, the answer to my prayers. Do you feel the intensity here? Do you feel the urgency here? Listen, my son, the son of my womb. I gave you birth. Listen to my son, the answer to my prayers. I prayed that I would have a child. I prayed for you. Listen. I wonder what she's going to tell him. In the immediate instructions, as she says, listen, my son, listen to my son, she issues warnings about women and alcohol. And I can just hear, Mom, women and alcohol. Because he is assuming massive responsibilities. And she says, do not let your energies be drained by chasing women. And do not let your judgment be dulled because you are more interested in having a good wine cellar than taking care of the broken people in your kingdom. She warns him about women. She warns him about wine, I think, as he is growing and ascending to the throne. And I just kind of stop and I go, I wonder what she had seen. I wonder what she had observed in other palaces. I wonder what she had witnessed in other courts that caused her to plead with her kid, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. If you want to love well and serve well and lead well, I gotta warn you about a couple things. Farmers Insurance has an ad campaign, and many of you know the tag that is at the end of the advertisements, and it's this. It's, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. I think in the voice of wise King Solomon at the beginning of the book where he says, listen, my son, listen to your mom and dad, listen, my son. And at the very end of Proverbs where there's King Lemuel's mom, listen, my son, I think it's listen, we've seen some things. We've seen situations prosper. We've seen situations unravel. Listen, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. Remember that when someone offers advice who's older and wiser, particularly if it's someone that has walked with God for a considerable period of time. Just remember that. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. They've seen people succeed at work and fail at home. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. They've seen people who were lethargic, unmotivated. They turned around and blamed everybody and everything else for the circumstances they found themselves in. They've seen it. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. They've seen really smart people do really stupid things. And they've seen ordinary, average people that weren't brilliant, that weren't off the charts gifted, but made serious progress in life because they just kept chipping away. Steady, faithful, showing up again and again and again. They weren't brilliant. They weren't phenomenally gifted, but they were faithful and they went somewhere. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. They remember something from their high school years, even if that seems 100 years ago. They witnessed something in their high school years. You know what they saw? They saw that sometimes individuals that were deeply devoted to cannabis were not always deeply devoted to class. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. They've seen the power of friendships one way or the other. They know that it is very difficult for a person to rise above their friendships because friends rub off. We end up becoming like the people that we hang out with. This is why parents harp on their kids for their friendships, because they've seen a thing or two. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. They've witnessed it. They've seen it dozens of times. This is why they give the advice that they do. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. They've seen that it takes years to build a good reputation. Doesn't take years to destroy one. And they've seen it over there, and they've seen it over there, and they've seen it over there. This is why the intensity, this is why the plea. They know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. Now, right about now, in the course of our conversation, I'm just confident that there are some of you that are just kind of thinking to yourself, Jeff, I'd give anything for a wise voice like that to show up in my life. My parents, they didn't give me great direction. I've never had a phenomenal mentor, a phenomenal advisor. You talk about receiving advice. I just wish someone would show up in my life and try to point me in a good direction. I have advice for you. Don't wait for someone to show up. Don't wait for someone to show up and guide you. I am responsible for recruiting advisors into my life. Don't wait for someone to show up. You got to go looking for them. Which brings us to the final part of today's conversation, the third part, which is just the quest for advice. And so just in this next verse, just want you to notice something with me, the word seek. Plans are established by seeking advice. It's like the idea here is you don't wait for it to come to you. It's like you go after it. You get after it. You look for it. And then it ends. So if you wage war, obtain guidance. Again, these are royal families in government. Listen, man, plans are established by seeking advice. Don't wait for it to come to you. Don't wait for it to show up. You are responsible to seek. Join the quest of recruiting advisors into your life. I love this next one for the way it's worded. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. Though it costs you all you have, get understanding. I read that like a while back and I went, the beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. It's like, thank you. It's like the beginning of fitness is this, get in shape. The beginning of savings account is this, save. It's kind of like, what help is that? But I think this is what the proverb does. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. I think it's like, listen, you got to go after it. The beginning of wisdom is this, get after the hard work of finding an advisor, of finding wise counsel, at finding advice. It's the quest. Get after it. Go after it. Listen, if I were a father of small children again, I'd recruit advisors, parenting advisors. I mean, if I were in a small group or even neighbors, listen, not with the perfect family, but just a solid family, and you watch the mom or the dad with their kids, and you just like what you see, and maybe they're watching you with yours, I would ask. Here's 5 more words. Can I ask your advice? Can I ask your advice? Do you ever get frustrated? Do you ever get weary? Do you ever get exhausted? Do you ever lose your temper? As you watch us, do you just see anything that we should change, that we should do differently? See, don't wait for counsel to come to you. Get after it. Go after it. And this is just not when the kids are little. I mean, listen, there are all of these books about having your first baby, preparing for parenthood. When Chris and I, when we reach like empty nest, our children deserting us and moving away, it was like there was this huge vacuum of advice on how to embrace the empty nest years as you try to redefine your marriage without kids living in the house. This was several years ago for us, but I'm telling you, it would have been wiser for me at the time to pick out some couples 10 or 15 years beyond where we were and saying, okay, I don't know what's coming. Any challenges around the corner for us? Any advice in how to navigate this next stage? Can I ask your advice? 5 more powerful words. Can I ask your advice? Some of you have a deep spiritual thirst. You sense the call of God upon your life in a way you haven't experienced it in years. You wake up in the morning, you try to read through a chapter 2 of the Bible, and you don't get it. I mean, you're trying, but how is it that other people, they sit down and like they journal and they observe things? 5 words. Can I ask your advice? What I'm suggesting to you is that there are perhaps 3 or 4 people in the Grand Rapids area who could guide you in reading the Bible and just say, okay, when I open the Bible, these are 2 or 3 questions I try to ask. Can I ask your advice when you get lost in your marriage? Don't wait till somebody's ready to move out. When you first feel wobbly wheels, tremors, seek out a couple who's been married a bit longer and they actually look like they enjoy each other's company. Can I ask your advice? When you feel lost financially, the courage to invite someone in and say, okay, this is the money that's coming in. This is the money that's going out. How do I make sense of this? You recruit a guide in the budgeting process. And I know right now some of you are just going like, yeah, oh, Jeff, man, it's embarrassing. Seriously, exposing that our marriage, we both feel lost and we don't know what to do. Having someone look over my financials, it's embarrassing. I don't want to expose where we are. See, you've already latched on to one of the most critical features in receiving advice, and it's this. You have to swallow your pride. Pride will kill the process in growing in the way of the wise. We have, in our culture, we have sayings that revolve around this. One of them looks like this. It says, pride comes before a fall. Pride comes before a fall. You know where that's from? You know where that's from? It's extracted from the book of Proverbs, chapter 16. Seriously, it's taken from here. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall, and that's just reduced to pride goes before a fall. Pride comes before a fall. Why? Why? Why does pride come before a fall? Pride comes before a fall because the proud refuse to listen to advice. They refuse to say, tell me what you see. And the proud refuse to seek advice in saying, can I ask your advice? And the flip side of this is the attribute, the characteristic of humility. And it's being humble enough to ask, and it's being humble enough to listen. Now, Proverbs, many of them were compiled about 1,000 years before the time of Jesus. Move with me to just after the time of Jesus, after the crucifixion and resurrection, where the Jesus community is just getting started. And James, the New Testament author, writes this. But God gives more grace. That is why Scripture says God opposes the proud. But man, he shows favor to the humble. When I am in arrogant pride, I can actually become an enemy of what God is trying to do in my life. God opposes the proud, but he shows his favor on those who humble themselves. By the way, James' expression there, but he gives more grace, that is why the Scripture says he's quoting Proverbs. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Just a few verses later, in verse 10, James will say, therefore, humble yourself before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Work in concert with what God desires to do in your life through the counsel of others. Humble yourself, and he will lift you up. Remember, at the very center of the Christian movement and the Christian community is the cross. And the way of a cross and the way of the Christ is humble self-sacrifice. Jesus came humbly. He calls us to live humbly. Pride comes before a fall. Humble yourself, and he will lift you up. And so it was some time ago that my ministry assistant held the letter from Ohio and asked, what do you want me to do with this? A letter detailing ways in which he thought I could improve upon my preaching. And I said, yeah, hang on to it. I'll take a look at it. And I did. And as I read down the letter and thought about it, my first impulse was to say, okay, you're wrong. But then further reflection is kind of going, you're right. You see, one of the things he said, listen, the sermon I listened to, you didn't tell one personal story. And I'm going, oh, please. I mean, I've lived in Grand Rapids since I was 18. I really only had one job. I bike a little, I run a little, I play with my grandkids. My life just isn't that interesting. And he just reminded me, many of these people you speak to are new. They know nothing about you. They don't know about your hobbies. They don't know about your parents. They don't know about your background. Just share some stuff about your life. And after reading that and thinking about that, I attempted to weave in just more personal stuff. That was good advice. Another thing that the letter from Ohio said, it said, you make these profound points, and then you race on to the next thing. You make this point that people really need to think about, and then you just keep moving. Pause. Pause, uncomfortably long pauses, to let things sink in and to give people time to process. So he's right. And so I have attempted to slow down and to pause a little bit more. Listen to advice. Tell me what you see. Listen to advice. We are naive to believe that we see everything and know everything that we need to know. That was my letter from Ohio. You have a letter from Ohio coming your way. It might come from a courageous coworker or a fearless friend. It might come from someone in your small group. It might come from your mom or your dad. It might come from the person that you're married to or a spiritual advisor. 5 words. Use them this week. Tell me what you see. Powerful words. 5 other words, because we're responsible to recruit counselors. Can I ask your advice? Can I ask your advice? My friends, I believe this is. It's the way of the wise. To listen to advice and to seek it out. And so I ask that our gracious God might meet you this week. May you have ears to hear. May you be able to discern when God is speaking to you through the voices of others. May you have the humility to receive and to respond and to grow in wisdom. We'll see you next week.